Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is Lionel Ketchian, and I'm here with George Ortega, and we're here to talk about happiness because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. I wonder why we don't focus on becoming happier. What's stopping us? Let's explore that. George, why aren't people becoming happier?
Yeah, why aren't we trying to become happier? I mean, because considering that our average level of happiness in this country is 69%, and throughout the world it's even lower in many countries, you would think that since happiness is our point in living, it's everybody's point in whatever we do, we would be trying to become happier. I think there's a couple of answers. Firstly, just historically, some people, or many people, philosophers, thinkers, have kind of concluded that it's not possible to become happier. You know, some would even conclude it's not possible to be happy. You know, fortunately the science has disproven them, but I think that's still in the culture. You know, people simply don't realize that it's very easy to become happier. And I think there's another reason, there's a few reasons. Another reason is that it's not like learning a language or playing an instrument or going to school or something. There is no institution there teaching us how to become happier. I mean, if we're fortunate, we'll have parents who understand happiness and teach us how to be happy. We'll have friends or people who influence us in that way, or we'll read books. But generally, for most of us, we don't have the mechanism, the structure, the program. And I think the last reason is that you know, we seek happiness, but since we've never been taught much about it, about how it works, what doesn't work, we generally seek it in indirect ways that for the most part don't work very well. You know, like trying to make money, or trying to become more educated, or trying to be more powerful or successful. You know, we think these things are going to make us happier, and unfortunately for us they don't. But you know, we just haven't learned yet that we can change our goals from those kinds of things to directly becoming much happier. So I guess the basic answer is we don't really realize that it's possible and it's that easy.
And I think that's true. In fact, we haven't done it. So how are we going to know what happiness really is if we've really never experienced happiness, or at least on a sustained basis as far as I'm concerned? I know you like to give us the statistics, George, on happiness, how many people are and how many people aren't. My feeling is we could be a heck of a lot happier, and we could be happy all the time. And that's, again, radical thinking, but if somebody doesn't say it, we're not going to get there. You know, this is probably like having a show like this 200 years ago, even though we didn't have TV back then, but we certainly didn't have airplanes. And if I sat here talking to you about this machine that I could fly around with, you would say, well, you're really nuts, and if we had TV, everyone out in the audience would think you're crazy. This reminds me of that. Happiness is like getting somewhere faster, better, and in much more comfort than everyone else is, and actually attaining the goal even bigger and brighter than the unhappy person would, yet no one is using it. It's almost like saying, hey, if you got a car, get in and let it drive you where you want to go. That's why you have a car. If life isn't to be lived happily, what are we doing? And why aren't we doing it? I think you're right. I think the awareness isn't there for many reasons. I happen to think one of the main reasons that people are not happy is that they're not aware that happiness is a possibility. If you're unconscious to the fact that there is a choice to be happy, if that is a choice that you cannot make because you're not aware of it, then guess what? You're not going to make it. You're never going to make that choice because that choice doesn't exist for you. Now, it exists for you, George, it exists for me, but that's only because we've made that choice. We've said, let me explore this, let me try it. And by trying it, it opened up a whole new world, and it opened up a whole new experience. And as far as I go, I got to tell you, I am being happy all the time, and when something happens that makes me feel as though my happiness is in question, then all I have to say to myself is, am I willing to give up my happiness because this situation is occurring? No, because then I'm even less effective in dealing with the situation through my unhappiness, because I'm not going to be resourceful enough to make a change. So I use the power of being happy to enable me to continue to deal with situations. Does that mean that everything I have to handle is something I like? No, I don't. I think that the difference is handling everything, coping with everything, and being happy while you do it. For example, I use my hands a lot. Now I was doing some raking, and I got like 2 big holes in my hand that show up on the camera, right? You could see them. So I'm saying to myself, gee, I'm going to be on television. People are going to see my hand and say, what's that red spot on his thumb? I go, that's life. And it's perfect just the way it is. Because if you're going to keep looking at the holes and what's imperfect in life, that's all you're going to look. You might as well look in trash bins the rest of your life, because that's all you're going to be looking at. Why don't you just look at all of life, enjoy it for what it is, and say, hey, this is great. There's good, there's bad, it's all good. Stop trying to judgmentalize everything and just enjoy your life. Because you're going to have the ups, you're going to have the downs. But if you keep looking for just the ups, you're going to have more downs. Because life is up and down until you're happy. And then I think it's just a pretty smooth transition of going along, dealing with what you have to go through. And life, you know, as soon as you make the happiness decision, I always say, life is going to teach you very quickly that you have to question that decision. And I think that's where it comes in. We're usually happy about something, and then pretty quickly we find out that there's a lot of danger lurking, so we better be unhappy because we may lose whatever it was we just got happy about. And I think that's the whole phenomena. It's a roller coaster ride.
Well, you know, I think in terms of like happiness and like knowing that we can become much happier, it's really good that we have a lot of examples, because like another statistic that psychologists have come up with that is very hopeful is that even though our average level of happiness as a country isn't all that high, about 20% of us are 85% happy, 85% happy or happier. So that's pretty happy. About 20% of us, one out of every 5 of us, are actually very happy. You know, 85% or more. So I think we can learn. We can. That should give us hope and inspiration. Those of us who aren't, as happy as we'd like to be. That a lot of people are out there, basically through their example, teaching the rest of the country, the rest of the world, that great happiness is possible. And hopefully, those, it's not as if it's being taught directly or, through any kind of institution. It's kind of like through the culture. And I think the problem is that people aren't listening and taking note as much as they could. Or maybe they're thinking to themselves, gee, this person's very happy, but it must be because he or she has more money or has some kind of advantage. Again, fortunately, the science has demonstrated that those kinds of advantages don't determine our happiness. But I think, we kind of don't understand happiness to realize that the people who are happiest in the world are happy because they've learned how to be happy, and it's kind of like an internal process for them.
George, you're right, and that reminds me, as you said those words, it reminds me of what Abraham Lincoln said, as you well know. Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. So happiness is an attitude, and if you make up your mind to be happy, you control your thoughts to be happy, then what you look for is what you see. And if you look for misery and unhappiness and suffering, then that's what you're going to experience. In fact, most people, in trying to avoid unhappiness, become unhappy, because it's not something you can avoid, because as soon as you recognize what unhappiness is, you see it everywhere. I think the trick is to identify with happiness, to understand it, and to allow yourself to think in terms of happiness as being what you want. Because once you realize that it is important, you can go after it. If you don't know what's important, if you don't know what has value, then you're not going to persuade yourself to go after happiness first and have it first. And in relationships, happiness is probably the most important thing, because I always say, who the heck gets married to live unhappily ever after? You know, you get married, you live happily ever after, or you have a relationship. And the truth is that, you know, we say we get married because we fell in love, but then, you know, 6 months later, 20 years later, 30 years later, we say, oh, I just got a divorce because I just can't live with that person. I'm miserable, I'm unhappy. So happiness is there, and it's even more powerful than love. I think love comes from happiness myself, but we won't debate that or discuss it. But if you're happy, you're going to have a lot more going for you. And, you know, as you began the whole conversation, George, I thought of going to school. I went to school in Manhattan, and that was like over 50 years ago. And I still remember one of my very low-level, you know, grade teachers, not that the teacher was low-level, but, you know, maybe it was third grade or second grade, and she looked at me and she said, wipe that smile off your face. So I was taught not to be happy because being happy was a bad thing. So if you talk about how do we learn how to become unhappy, we've been trained as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you had mentioned before also that like a lot of us don't really seek happiness or pleasure, and sometimes we seek unpleasure or displeasure, and that's like too true, because like what happens is, for example, the media, you know, the news programs, you know, starting at 4:30 in the afternoon through 7 o'clock, they are presenting problem after problem after problem, and you know, I haven't done research on this directly yet, and I'd like to try to understand why people watch such negativity, because so much of it is negative. One possible reason might be that people who aren't very happy will look at those shows and see people who are actually even doing worse, and they might feel better about themselves, you know, because of that. And I think that probably works to a certain extent, but, you know, having said that, I think the kind of people who generally would watch those shows a lot probably aren't very happy, and that might be one of the reasons, because they're gaining their happiness by noticing the unhappiness of others, rather than by looking to people who are much happier, and to principles and stimuli and things in the world that would make them genuinely much happier, not at the expense of others or because others have it less good, but simply because the things are, you know, of themselves very good, and you know, would evoke happiness.
You're right, George, and I think it's conditioning. One of the main ingredients to being happy is conditioning yourself, to train yourself and almost habitualize the behavior you want, you know, the attitude that you want. And happiness has always been by effect. In other words, I'll be happy if, you know, Oprah Winfrey says that this show is the best show on TV next to her show, okay? But that won't be why I'm happy. I'm going to be happy in spite of it. The point is that when you're happy to begin with, then it's more of a causative thing. And happiness, the other way, is an effect, and it really is an addiction, because then you look for happiness. The trouble with that is you're never going to find it. If you keep looking for happiness in someone, with someone, in a better job, in more money, the problem is you're never going to be satisfied with that, and it's always going to be an addictive nature to try to get more. But the trouble is, more won't do it. And more will just be more, and there'll be that hollow feeling that you can't fill. So there's a whole other way at it. And that way is to come out of a fulfilled feeling. Now, I like to make a differentiation here, and that is, you could be happy but not satisfied. I know the word satisfied came up, you know, in another show, but I like to feel that, so you're not satisfied. You can change things, you know, make a better happy face, whatever you want to do to make things better, but don't become unhappy. Let happiness be a wealth that nobody can take from you, because it belongs to you, and with happiness, go about changing things. That's the way I like to see happiness. I like to see happiness be a stimulus for you to... See, we use unhappiness to get us to make changes. We think if we become unhappy and angry at someone, we motivate them to make a change. When the truth is, there's nothing more powerful than smiling at somebody who's irritating, because people go crazy when you're happy when you shouldn't be, and you should be angry. But the trick here is you're not letting them manipulate you. Again, I want to mention another thing. The whole reason I think that I'm doing this show and I talk about happiness is power. why give your power away to somebody and become unhappy? I mean, people can't make you unhappy. You give them permission to make you unhappy by giving them your power. So you got to cut that out if you want to live a little more powerful life and be in charge of yourself. Otherwise, you know what it's like to be unhappy and give your power away, feel unhappy. That's up to you. But there is another way to live. And I think that's one of the reasons this show is very successful, George, because people can empower themselves to deal with life.
Yeah, you mentioned before the idea that that we're seeking happiness through different things, and that, you know, if we constantly want more to be happier, we're not going to become as happy as we could because there's always more to want. Mm-hmm. And that's very true. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes that's kind of like also a very complicated way at becoming happier, because happiness can be seen in various ways. I think you referred to before that happiness is an attitude. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And attitudes have as one of their central components a belief. You know, I think an attitude is belief, behavior, and some other third component, but basically, as Abraham Lincoln alluded to in his statement that we're as happy as we make up our minds to be, that we can become very, very happy, as happy as we want to be, simply by believing that we're very happy, that we're even completely happy. You know, because you hear sometimes Buddhists and yogis, you know, being interviewed or through a book just stating their level of happiness, and they say they're completely happy. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that if you begin to do this, okay, if you begin to, let's say, decide to believe that you're very happy or you're completely happy, it's not going to happen overnight. You know, it's kind of like a belief like that will take time to develop. Like, the more you make that decision to believe that you're very or completely happy, the more your mind will be influenced to believe that. Because our minds, I mean, this is another subject they've studied. Psychologists have studied the fact that, like, the more we're exposed to certain stimuli, the more we will like that stimuli and the more we'll believe it. And that's why you see so many car commercials repeated, you know, hundreds and thousands of times, you know, on TV. I mean, it's a principle that Madison Avenue and advertising has used very, very effectively. And so, I'm sorry, we could use that same principle to just decide to believe right at the very moment, regardless of what else is happening in our lives, that we are very or completely happy, and given several months, you know, could take a year or longer, depending on how much work we do at it. But in that simple way, we could be as happy as we want to be.
George, that's why I love doing this show with you, because I agree with everything you say. You know, you get to a point where happiness is sort of the tip of the triangle, and how can you not agree with everything when it comes to happiness? Because you've been living it, you understand it, I've been living it. And as you're talking, you bring to mind, when you said happiness is a decision, I wrote those words in a book I wrote 13 years ago called Food for Thought. I love food, so everything relates to food with me. And stay tuned for the happiness diet. That'll be next. But I wrote the book called Food for Thought, and in it I wrote happiness is a decision. And I was fortunate enough to be endorsed by Dr. Bernie Siegel, Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager, and Reverend Norman Vincent Peale. And you know, the words happiness is a decision is something that I've come to understand. I wrote them, but you know, it became a big deal for me because I started to live it. Unless you make the happiness decision, you can never make the choice to be happy because your awareness won't let you. And as George is saying, unless you make that attitude foremost in your mind, you won't be able to connect with it. It won't be there. You'll see something else. And for me, being happy is a state of mind, but really a state of life. So I'm being happy, live my life, I'm enjoying it. And you know, what you think of me is none of my business, and I can't make everyone happy, I found out, and nor do I care to. So those people who want to go watch something else, that's fine. But if you're watching this show and you want to be happier, or you want to even learn to be happy, then what you got to do is practice being happy. You got to start right now in making it a part of your life. Feel how it feels to be happy, act as if you're happy, and once you do that, once you do it, and connect with that feeling, George, of being happy, then what happens is you're not going to give it up. Because then on the table, you really look at life and say, well, this doesn't make me happy, but you know what? I'm going to keep my happiness and use it to make the change that I want to see. Rather than give up my happiness, I'm going to deal with it. I may not like it, but I'm not going to say it makes me unhappy. Because then, once I say I'm unhappy, I have given the situation power that it did not possess before. So let's keep our power where we need it, and that's with us. Happiness is power. Don't let it go.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned the idea that we should act as if we're happy, and that's very important because, like, again, there are different approaches to becoming as happy as we'd like to be, and one is believing, another is acting. For example, this goes back to actually Darwin. He proposed a few hundred years ago or so, or I don't know when it was, but
18 something.
Okay, yeah, the idea that our facial expressions precede our emotions rather than our emotions preceding not just our facial expression but any kind of behavioral expression.
Good point, George.
Yeah, well, that led to psychologists, this one psychologist, James Laird in particular, studying smiling, okay, which is really interesting because, like, even also like in Shakespeare, I think there's a line about acting in a certain way and feeling that way. I can't remember when that line is, but the idea, what he did is he experimented with smiling, and he tried to demonstrate that a person smiling will feel better than a person doesn't. It doesn't work with everyone, but it's kind of like a learned thing. I mean, what he determined was that about 50% of us, I guess through conditioning, will, for example, be at a party, and because we're at a party, and a party is an occasion to feel happy and joyful, that will make those kinds of people happy and joyful. They're external cue receivers. But then 50% of the population, by simply smiling, that acting as if, that even if a person doesn't feel happy, just simply smiling, acting happy, doing things that a happy person does, will cause the person to be much happier. And one last point about this, which is really interesting, because they thought, like, when they did this experiment, that, well, the person, like, knew that they're supposed to be happier when they smiled, and that's what caused them to be happier. So what's really interesting is they actually had people hold a pencil between their teeth, which activated the zygomatic muscles, the smile muscles, right? Mm-hmm. So here they are. They don't realize they're smiling, but the muscles are activated and they become happier. Basically, the idea is that, it's been demonstrated in theater, through life, in so many ways that that if we want to feel a certain way, it really helps to just play that role.
Yeah. You're so right, George, and what you're really talking about is a state change, an emotional, psychological, physiological change of state. This is all your state, and it's all composed of these things. So that acting as if will actually change your state, and when you're state changing, you're changing your behavior. Now, most people want to try to just change behavior, which you can do. There's really three components to living, and that is your thinking, and your feeling, the emotional level, and then behavior. We all try to change behavior but it all comes from our thinking. So right now, if you're listening, you with the popcorn and you with the remote in your hand, you've got to make a decision to be happy. If you don't do it right now, the next week when you tune into the show, you haven't done it, that'll be, 7 days later. And then what happens? Your whole life goes by. I'll be talking to you when you're 108, and then you're going to make the decision. Now's the time. I don't care if you're 3 years old or if you're 99. Now's the time you can be happy, but you can only do it right now. It may be 5 minutes from now, but it'll always be in one moment in time, and that's now. The only reason you won't do it is you think you can't, or you can't sustain it. But if you haven't tried it, how would you know? That's why we're on the air. We're here to tell you happiness works. So if you change your thinking, you could change the way you feel, because your thinking is going to affect your feeling. And if you grab your emotional level, which is happiness, your state changes, your behavior will change. If you do nothing else, when you walk in the street, walk with a little bit of a bounce. And like George's, put a little smile on your face. See what that does for you. Make that change, little change, and see how you feel. See, you got to remember one thing. You got to start smiling. You got to start feeling happy for no reason. You got to do it unconditionally, because once you have a reason, you always have a reason to lose it. Like, I won the lottery, but now life stinks, and I lost my money, and my relatives are driving me crazy, so the reason goes away. But if you do it for no reason, nothing can touch it, nothing can take it away. Being happy is an unconditional exercise. If you do it, you benefit from it. So why not? What's stopping you?
Oh yeah, and you mentioned a very good point. Just the idea that sometimes we will wait for something to happen. You know, if we're kids, we'll wait to be able to drive, and then we'll wait to graduate, get a job, get married, make money, be retired. And it's always in the future when, your point is right on target, that we can be extremely, very, completely happy right in the present.
Yes, really. George, it's amazing how the time goes by. I want to take a moment to just let people know, if they want to hear more about this and stay, again, it's conditioning. Check out the website, happinessclub.com. Click on the icon, get a free newsletter. I write a column for the newspaper called Be Happy Zone. It's not just talk. It's not something we made up. Happiness has been around for a long time, but it does you no good if you don't use it. So it's pretty much like wealth that you haven't been, using. Now's your time. So I want to really encourage you to live your life with happiness. You're so much better off to yourself, everyone around you. If you haven't got happiness, you can't give it away. You can't give away what you haven't got. So with that, I want to, thank you all for listening, and that's about all we have time for today. But thanks so much for watching, and in the future we'll be exploring other topics designed to help us better enjoy life. Be good, think well, feel very happy, and I hope that you'll join us again next week here on The Happiness Show. Take care, make the happiness decision, and be well. Thanks so much, George. It was a pleasure to see you and be with you, and really appreciate it.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.